Welcome back to the Metro on WDET Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent. The auto industry in Southeast Michigan is showing signs of trouble. In May, Ford called it quits on a mega project to modernize its vehicle's computing systems. The fully networked vehicle is estimated to have cost Ford $10 billion before it shut the project down in the spring. That had consequences for a local engineering company that works with Ford. Bosch confirmed to the Metro that it laid off 160 people from its Mobility Cross-Domain Computing Solutions division in the U.S., including cuts to those who worked out of the company's Plymouth, Michigan office. Bosch announced in November of last year that it would need to eliminate 3,500 mobility cross-domain jobs worldwide by 2027. Then there are Trump's tariffs. The elimination of EV tax credits and slower than expected electric vehicle sales here in the U.S. have made the electric car future much less certain. Joining me now to discuss the implications of Ford's fully networked vehicle failure and the future of EVs in the U.S. is John McElroy. He's a journalist and broadcaster who has extensive knowledge of the auto industry. He broadcasts 3 radio segments on WWJ, writes a blog for Autoblog, and a monthly column for Ward's Auto, among other things. John, thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Hey, thanks for having me, Robin.
So we're discussing the fully networked vehicle project and how that was shut down. For starters here, what is a fully networked vehicle?
Yeah, there's been this amazing shift in the automotive industry. It started with Tesla, frankly, and I think Tesla got the idea from the smartphone business. But there's 2 technical terms to keep in mind here. Automakers are trying to develop what they call software-defined vehicles. SDV. It's one of the hottest terms in the industry right now. If you talk to 10 different software engineers, you'll probably get 10 different definitions. My definition of a software-defined vehicle is where everything in the car is controlled by software. Everything. So even if you flick a switch, it's actually triggering a software command. It's not necessarily, a mechanical connection. And then they want all that software to run on what they call centralized zonal computing. And we got to get in a little bit into the weeds here, but I'll simplify. So before this all started, every component in a car had a microprocessor to control whatever that component did. I mean, right now, your cars today have microprocessors in the seats, in the mirrors, in the tires, in the headlamps, and everything else in the car. There is well over 100 microprocessors in a typical car today, probably about 150. And all the software that's written to drive those micros is developed by the suppliers that made those components. So you have hundreds of suppliers writing all the software that an automaker really cannot access unless it goes through the supplier. And so as you get into this idea of doing over-the-air updates, which Tesla pioneered, where you can fix things on a car remotely as long as they're software-driven, automakers love this idea. And by going to what they call zonal centralized computing, what they do is and I'm oversimplifying here, so people who really know this stuff will laugh at my description, but I think you'll get the idea. They divide the car into zones: left front, left rear, right front, right rear. And that zone is run by a computer. So instead of having microprocessors that are all over the car, you have zones with a micro driving it. And then the centralized part comes, those zones feed into one centralized computer, which has got some very powerful microprocessors driving it. But the end result is that you can literally take miles of wiring out of a car. Wires are all copper. Copper is expensive. Trump just threw more tariffs on top of copper. Copper is heavy as well. Weight is the enemy of any car, but especially in an electric car. And so going to centralized zonal computing and using a software-defined vehicle opens up all kinds of opportunities for an automaker to cut costs, reduce weight, add features to a car, fix them remotely, and the like. But it's really hard to do, really expensive to do. Ford's not the only one that's had problems with it. Everybody has. And Tesla itself struggled to get all this stuff right. But it's easier if you're a startup company like a Tesla or a Lucid or a Rivian or whomever.
Sure.
When you have essentially a clean slate to work with. Whereas legacy automakers like Ford or Volkswagen or GM or whomever have to drag their entire supply base along with it. And so what Ford, sorry, go ahead.
No worries, John. And I do want to say thank you, because the John McElroy definition here, the 101 class on fully networked vehicles, is amazing and crisp and clear. And I have such a better understanding now of what we're talking about. And I think a lot of listeners do too. I do want to get into the reason why the fully networked vehicle project failed. I mean, Ford tapped former Apple and Tesla executive Doug Field to lead the fully networked vehicle initiative. The expertise in software and electric vehicles that Field was apparently hired for didn't translate into success. So I think you were maybe going down this road when I jumped in, but let's get into the specifics. Why did this fail?
Yeah, apologies for going so deep into the rabbit hole there. But Ford has two programs going. It started what they call a Skunk Works operation out in California. Skunk Works, for those not familiar with the term, generally refers to an operation that a company sets up that's away from the mothership, away from headquarters, and operates as a startup. And Ford is developing a new generation of electric vehicles in its Skunk Works in California. And it is continuing to work on software-defined vehicles running on a zonal centralized compute platform. But what Ford has decided for the meantime, for its legacy vehicles, the gasoline-powered ones that have all these components from suppliers all over the place with their own software in it, it's going to leave things as it is. It's just too hard, too expensive. It hasn't been able to succeed on that. So, yes, it did shut down its program in Dearborn, Michigan for its legacy products. It's continuing its development in California at the Skunk Works. And I imagine at some point in the future, I don't know, I'll take a guess, 5 years down the road, it'll merge those two things, because it doesn't really want two different systems.
So, John, you're saying Ford hasn't totally pumped the brakes, but I'm wondering, $10 billion is a lot of money, or at least it seems like it to me. So can you put this project cancellation into perspective? How big of a failure is it really?
Well, it's big. I mean, you have to put it in industry perspective terms. I mean, Volkswagen, for example, started an entirely separate software company called Cariad to do the exact same thing. It lost just as much money as Ford did, and the thing's been a total disaster. So, I mean, this is just how the auto industry operates. Sometimes you put a lot of money into something that doesn't pay off. It's an extremely capital-intensive business, which is why the industry has been so brutally competitive for so long, but more so now.
Well, Ford has been racing against GM and Stellantis domestically to lead on electric vehicles, and the fully networked vehicle was thought to be vital to compete on EVs, and that explains why so many resources, so much money was spent on this project. What does this tell us about where Ford is going to invest more of its focus now?
Well, like I said, I think the Skunk Works in California is going to pick up the flag and continue forward on this kind of development. And what Ford has decided is it got somewhere down the road with its fully networked vehicle project. It will keep the lessons learned and keep where it got to, but it's not going to pour money into its legacy systems or its legacy products. It's going to wait for the Skunk Works to come up with the answer.
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about how Ford's fully networked vehicle project failure is affecting auto suppliers here in Southeast Michigan. Our guest is John McElroy. He's a journalist and broadcaster who specializes in the auto industry. And John, I do want to talk about the suppliers in Southeast Michigan now. We know there's a vast network of companies that contribute to what is ultimately a Ford or GM or Stellantis vehicle that comes off the line. So when GM profits are down or auto tariffs are enacted or Ford abruptly cancels a $10 billion project, suppliers feel that. How much of an effect do the big three automakers have on workers here in Southeast Michigan?
Well, a huge impact. And, the supplier industry is in really dire straits right now. We have an affordability crisis when it comes to buying new cars in this country. They're just too expensive.
What's the, I've got to tap you on this now. The average price right now for a car, the last auto expert I spoke with about this, I think it was hovering at something wild. I want to say 48,000. Is that right? Am I?
Yeah, no, you're spot on, Robin. Yeah. It's a little bit higher than that right now. It's probably more like 49,000.
Ouch.
So, the industry has priced millions of households out of the new car market. Nobody wants to spend that kind of money. I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of people don't want to spend that kind of money to buy a new car.
Or can't.
or can't. Exactly right. And so, we saw this happen with COVID. There was restricted supply and prices went up. Car companies and car dealers made very good profits. Dealers made the biggest profits in their existence. The chip shortage kept it that way too. And so they were able to raise prices. Suppliers were not. And so you've got volume coming down right now. Car sales, because of the Trump tariffs, are going to sink for the rest of the year, in my opinion. And it's not just my opinion, by the way. And you've got costs going up for suppliers, whether it's raw materials or components that they bring in from overseas. And so they're caught between a rock and a hard place. Car sales are coming down, their costs are going up, and that is going to have an impact on employment. I think we will likely see automotive employment in this country go down, not up, because of the tariffs.
I want to veer off course for a moment here, if we could, slightly, John, because you have been studying, reporting on the auto industry for many years, and I wonder if you can just characterize this moment for us, because it feels like it must be a bit, is it unprecedented in terms of considering the bigger picture and everything that you have seen as a reporter and someone who studies what's happening in the auto industry day in and day out?
I'd say this is the most intense time I've ever seen in the history of the auto industry. You've got the biggest problem is that we've hit peak auto. We sold more cars in this country a decade ago than we do right now. It's not growing. And this is actually a global phenomenon. Car sales have stopped growing. On top of that, you've got this move to software-defined vehicles, zonal, centralized computing, really expensive. Everyone's struggling with it. Every automaker has invested tens of billions of dollars to make electric cars. Yeah. The sales are not there to pay off on those investments. You've got a talent shortage. Nobody wants to work in factories, it seems, these days anymore. Every company I visit complains that they can't get the people they want. And now you got the Trump tariffs on top of all that. And I think this combination is unprecedented.
Wow. I mean, the fully networked vehicle failure is at least going to delay Ford's progress when we talk about EVs. Plus, President Trump's budget passed by Congress ends EV rebates at the end of September. Plus, California is rolling back environmental requirements which affect emissions. Now, John, a reasonable person could see all of this and conclude the EV future, specifically when we're talking about this moment and autos, the EV future specifically we've heard about might be further away than we thought. Is the industry pulling back its investments in EV research, development, and production?
I don't think they're reducing their R. That is the research. In terms of developing new models, yes, programs are getting delayed. Look, I personally believe EVs are the future. I believe the industry is going to go electric, but it's going to take longer than was thought of just a few years ago. Some companies are making really good progress. I would cite General Motors, for example. It's now second only to Tesla in selling EVs in the U.S. And Cadillac in particular is doing a pretty good job. You know, at the end of June, Cadillac was at a sales rate where 1 out of every 3 Cadillacs sold in the country is electric. Moreover, something like 80% of the people buying these electric Cadillacs never would have approached the Cadillac brand before. And this is especially happening on the east and west coasts, where GM market share-wise has historically been weak. So there's some bright spots out there, but yeah, if you look back to the mania, the irrational exuberance over EVs 5 years ago, it hasn't happened. And it's up to the auto industry to figure out how to get costs out so that people will want to buy these cars.
The irrational exuberance has to do with the fact that electric vehicles are really positioned as one of the many solutions necessary to reduce carbon emissions and hopefully, John, to keep the world from breaching the ominous milestone of 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise. Now, we know China isn't slowing down its EV production, but the U.S. is still a big player in auto manufacturing, obviously. In short, though, what I'm getting at here is that time is of the essence. So in terms of years, how big of a setback do you think we're seeing with EVs from domestic automakers?
Well, you know, before Trump came in and had the administration remove all the incentives, I thought that EVs would account for about 1 out of 3 by the year 2030. I would push that back at least a decade right now. But having said that, there's some really good EVs that are just about 1 or 2 years away from hitting the market. You know, we talked about the Ford Skunk Works project earlier. I think that we're going to see some terrific EVs coming out of that effort. General Motors is bringing back the Chevrolet Bolt in about a year. That's going to be extremely affordable. I believe it'll be well under $30,000, even without any of the government rebates. So, you know, just give the industry a little bit more time. You're going to see much more competitive EVs, and I believe that will bring a lot more new buyers into the market, into the EV segment.
John, I realize you're very busy right now with all the news that is constantly coming out of the auto industry. So I want to thank you for joining us on the Metro. John McElroy is a journalist and broadcaster specializing in the automotive industry. He's the creator of Autoline Daily, the first industry webcast of auto industry news and analysis. John, thanks again.
Thanks so much, Robin.
This is the Metro on WDET, and coming up on the show, Detroit and Windsor share more than a river. They share a love for spreading the joy of arts and culture. We'll learn more about this, a new collaborative magazine that aims to highlight both cities' unique creative offerings. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is the Metro. Stay with us.